Since everybody made such a wonderful effort to get here on time and our lovely guests have gotten here nice and early, I'd love to start. So thank you very much, everybody, for being here on this important night. My name is Ashley Austin. I'm the director of the Center for Human Rights and Social Justice in the School of Social Work, so thank you. Tonight I'd like to introduce our guest, who is our colleague, Dr. Heidi Laporte, who brought to us a wonderful opportunity to have her aunt, Mrs. Helga Melmed, come and speak with us today about her experiences and share her story with us as a survivor of the Holocaust. And I feel like we are honored to have her here in our presence, and I thank you so much for your willingness to come and speak with us and share your story and be a voice for all those who can't share their voices with us. So thank you. I don't know if this mic will travel with me, so I actually don't think it will, so Heidi's going to have to transport this for me. Oh, okay. So what we have brought today, we wanted to give you, the Center for Human Rights and Social Justice has brought you a lovely certificate of our appreciation and a gift to as a small token of our appreciation.
That's
so,
nice. Thank you.
Heidi wants to read that. She can grab that.
Barry University School of Social Work, the Center for Human Rights and Social Justice presents this certificate of appreciation to Mrs. Helga Melmed. Thank you for being an inspiration and a voice of change. And it's signed by Dr. Austin, who is the director of the Center for Human Rights and Social Justice. And there's a gift. And I think we like to open gifts right away. Wow.
It looks like a
blanket.
Looks like a thing.
It's a blankie.
It's a blanket.
It's a cozy blankie.
It says, living the Barry life. Awesome.
Nice.
Yeah.
so much.
So we get cold in Florida, and it doesn't get cold.
Very nice.
You have a blankie. Awesome.
I think that really
Thank you.
Thank you.
Great. Okay.
Very nice. Now I won't be cold tonight.
So I would like to thank all of you for being here. I am really grateful to the Dean for being here and sharing in this moment with us. And also I want to thank Dr. Sarah Lewis, who, like you can't hear me. I want to thank Dr. Sarah Lewis because when we first met, we talked about what a great idea it would be to bring my aunt here to speak at Barry, and actually it's come to fruition. So I'm just so delighted that we're able to do this. And I think I'm going to sit down so that I don't tower over you. And we're going to do this conversational style. So is that all right with everyone? Okay, great. And before we begin, I guess I'd like to say something a little personal, if I might, which is that when I was younger, we never really spoke about about your experience, having been a child survivor of the Holocaust. And for us, there was sort of an unspoken line that we just didn't cross. And we weren't ever told not to speak about it, but I think each of us held a little piece of your pain, and we just waited until it was the right time, and we knew that you would know when that time was. And at some point, little by little, you started to share some of your story, but in fact, this is the first time that you and I have ever had an extended conversation about your experience. And so I want to really thank you for gifting me with your story, which is so important, and sharing it with my colleagues and students here for many reasons. And I would also like to dedicate tonight to your parents, George and Frida, who are here with us, because love never dies, it only changes form. I'd like to dedicate tonight to your beloved Uncle Charles, who you were married to for 65 years. And he is now on the other side at a family reunion. And to my grandparents, your other parents, Simon and Celia, and your best friend, my mother, Liba, and to my father, who often was a sparring partner with my Uncle Charles. So tonight we share this experience and honor the memory of all of those who are with us in spirit but can't be here to tell their stories. So I thank you for sharing yours with us tonight. And so on that note, let me just begin. I was going to introduce you, but I'll actually just begin with my first question, which is that you have spoken about your experience in schools and in other venues. And it seems that this has become increasingly more important to you to talk about this. And I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about why you agreed to come here today and why you do speak to people about this experience. I'm going to hand you the microphone, so turn it on.
She has one. She has one. Look, I should be zooming in on her.
Yeah, it's on.
I didn't speak to my children. I didn't speak to my nephew and nieces. For many years, I couldn't talk about anything that happened previously.
Thank you.
But when I first moved to Florida, I decided I would speak to the young people because Yad Vashem, we should never forget what hate and violence can do to people, to their lives, to their memories, and to their next person. And not only to their next person, to their next country, to their next nation, and to everybody in the world. It's a terrible thing. We should not hate. We should respect each other as people. We don't have to be personal to them, but we do have to respect each person, whatever color, whatever religion. Everybody is the same. We're all human people.
Thank you.
Gotta turn it on.
Were you able to hear?
Yes.
Yeah, but it was not.
Am I going to hold it over? Okay. So, before we talk about your story, I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about your family history. About your parents, your grandparents, what you know.
The family history begins with a lot of hatred, not only in Germany, but it already started, I think, probably with the beginning of the world. Because when my parents were, my grandfather in the early 1900s lived in Poland. He was persecuted for being Jewish. He ran from Poland. It was Russia at the time. The countries kept changing, and everything was bad for the Jews in the area that they lived. So they ran away from that area by foot, he, his wife, and 2 children. They walked across to Germany, and while they were walking to Germany, his wife was shot. He continued on to Germany with 2 small children. He arrived in Germany, remarried a woman, a Jewish woman in Germany, and my mother and my aunt were born in Germany. And thus the family of hatred begun. Later on, my parents met in Germany. Should I go on with it? My father was actually born in Holland, immigrated to Germany, met my mother, and they were married when they were in their early 20s. And I was born in 1927. Early 20s. It was a long time ago. They were very happy, and after a few years, I arrived. They were delighted with their first child. The delight only lasted a few years because there was a depression coming into Germany. There were rumbles of elections. Like in all countries, there are parties and other parties and more hullabaloo, more propaganda, more things to listen to. And finally, with all the Turum and Tara, Hitler was elected. And the problems for the Jews began. As I said before, prejudice is a terrible thing, and it does nothing but breed violence. I started school when I was 5 years old, and my first teacher was Frau Weger. How does a child remember a first grade teacher? Do your children? I remember her because she beat my hands with a ruler until my hands bled. And then she called me dirty Jew and made the children shout the same things to me. I ran home to my mother and I said, "Mommy, give me a bath again and again and again because I'm dirty." She tried to explain to a 5-year-old what it meant to be a dirty Jew. It's very difficult to get a child's imagination away from being dirt, mud, and anything else but that. After that, things became bad in Germany. I was taken out of the public school that became progressively bad and put into a private school. The private school was a Jewish school, and it was a great school. The learning was fantastic, the homework was a lot, and we had parties. Our whole life became the school because as things progressed in Germany, there were signs all over the world, over our world. You're not allowed in this store. You're not allowed in the park. You're not allowed into the zoo. You're not allowed to see the movies anymore. Everything that a child wanted to do, everything we wanted to do, was suddenly forbidden for Jewish children. So the school took up where the Nazis left off for us. We were in school, we had parties in school, we had competition with other Jewish schools, and life became very happy at the Jewish school. But that too passed rapidly. As the years progressed, 1938 came around, and before you know, came Kristallnacht. Kristallnacht was a terrible thing. The stores were plundered. The schools were burned. I came to the school in the morning. My school was in flame. We children gathered around the books. They were burning the books, our learning, our life, all of a sudden up in flames. They enjoyed doing that. They were burning the books. We weren't supposed to learn anything else. We were hugging, we were crying, we were screaming. We went home, we were destroyed, and everything seemed to be terrible. But we didn't give up, because pretty soon there were teachers that loved us. There were teachers, there were volunteers, all kinds of people gathered together. And they took us children into small groups, into basements of houses where they lived, and they taught us. They taught us all kinds of things. They taught us math, they taught us cooking, they taught us life skills. They taught us all kinds of things, not exactly from the books, but very expectedly from the life of the life that we might be living. And life went on. We kept learning, we kept doing things, we kept hiding in different people's apartments and in the basements, while life outside got worse and worse. They came after our things. Every day was something different. Every week, Jews had to give up their silverware. Jews had to give up their radios. Jews had to give up their telephones. Jews had to give up this. Jews had to give up that. It was constantly, we had to run and give up things. Yet the adults, we children were still pretty happy, but the adults kept whispering, and they kept saying, a lot of them would be emigrating to different countries. My parents stood in line for a number to come to the United States. That number never came up. There were so many of us that wanted to leave. People left for all other countries. My uncle, my father's brother, left for Shanghai. There too, it was good for a while. Then the Japanese came to Shanghai, and the Jews were chased again, chased out of China, out of Shanghai, into Australia. Is that the life for people? Always to be hated just because we had a different religion? And yet everybody says they believe in God. Is there one God, or are there many? I still question many things about that. Anyways, we were in where were we? In Germany. Someplace stuck in Germany.
You were in Berlin, and you went to the lodge.
Oh, after Kristallnacht was in 1938. I'm just running through the years as the time passes. Things were bad, things were taken away from us. Some men were taken away and taken into concentration camps. My father was taken away but came back. And, but then in 1941, all of a sudden, in the middle of the night, there was this big loud banging against our door, and there were a bunch of stormtroopers dressed in black uniforms, and they shouted at us, "You gotta leave, hurry up, Rouse, let's go." And everybody stood there and was saying, "Where are we going?" "Oh, you're going to a better place." What can be a better place than your home? Can you imagine being chased out of your house and told that it's going to be a better place? It wasn't Florida. We were going willingly to Florida, but we weren't going willingly to the ghetto. We were put into cattle cars, and by the hundreds, we were pushed into those cars. Well, first we were put onto trucks and taken to a gathering station. The gathering station was an old slaughterhouse. There were hooks around the edges of the slaughterhouse where they used to hang beef or pork or God knows what. And we were driven to there, we were left off, and we were driven into this place, and we heard the people screaming. They had hung people on the hooks in the slaughterhouse like pieces of meat. They were bleeding, they were screaming, and my mother was holding me tight, covering my eyes, and she kept saying, my father was holding on to me, and they kept saying, "Wir alle drei will be together, we'll be all right. The three of us, as long as we're together, we'll be okay." And we stayed there for a short while, and I did not see, but I could smell and I could hear the screams. And some nights, those screams come back to me. We were taken into cattle cars, and the cattle cars were full with people. They were filled so you couldn't barely stand. We were stuffed in there like sardines. And then we started to ride, and we rode. I don't know how long we rode. We rode forever, it seemed to me. People were dying in the car from the heat, from the sweat, from the sweating, from the smell, from the feces that were all over the place, from the vomit that was all over the place. It was just a horrible, horrible trip. As far as food got, we didn't get any. They gave us some water every so often. The train would stop, and they would bring a bucket of water to the entrance, and they had a ladle, and they would give it to us. But everybody was fighting for a sip of water, so there was more water sipped than people could get, and there was just no water at all. Finally, after long last, we arrived, half dead, in Lodz, or Litzmannstadt, as they called it. Lodz was a ghetto. Lodz is in Poland. The Polish Jews were taken out of their houses already at that time. They were driven into the ghetto, and they were made to take whatever they could as far as housing went. Some of them had housing in that area, others did not, and they found housing. But the ghetto was already overcrowded, and now they dumped hundreds and hundreds of German Jews into this place. We were not welcome there. We were a different language, we had a different culture, and we were just not welcome because they were starving already. Why would you want more people into a place where you're starving already? But there we were, and they dumped us into the ghetto. We stayed at the ghetto. The men worked. The women worked. My father was taken out of the ghetto and with other men under heavy guard, and he had to do labor in the city, hard labor, digging things and making tunnels and doing hard labor stuff. He was not accustomed to that. But anyway, he was doing it, and in between that, he would be able to find some coffee grounds in some dump and some potato peels, because the Germans or the Poles were still eating. Maybe not as well as before the war, but they were still eating. So the potato peels and the coffee ground that my father brought back to us were a lifesaver. And they became our supper. My mother used to grind up the potato peels, put a tablespoon of flour from the ration into it, and make like little patties out of them, and that would be my supper. And that way we didn't starve. The coffee grounds were mixed into it, the flour and the potato peels. They were a good supper. They filled up the hole in the stomach. One day, the men were gathered like they were every morning, and they had to run around the marketplace where the usual meeting place was, and they were used for target practice. My father was shot. They dragged him back to us, and he was dead. I never saw my father again. He left that morning and never came back. After that, there was my mother and I. We lived in a little place that we had been put into, and we had a bed that was made of wood slabs. We had a little tiny stove where she cooked the potato peels, and nothing much else. We got a ration which was very minimal, and that's how we lived. My mother worked in the factory sewing soldiers' uniform. I worked in the factory putting the buttons on soldiers' uniforms. Do you know how hard it is to sew heavy material like soldiers' uniforms and put buttons on with the hands of a small 12-year-old child? It was very hard work for me. My fingers still hurt from it. We did that for a while. Then my mother became sick. She became very sick. And she had tuberculosis, a galloping type of tuberculosis, consumption, what it was called. And she was very sick, she was very feverish, and I tried to take care of her as best as I could. I still had to go to work, but I came home and she would say, "Helga Line, you eat this." She would give me her ration, she could give me her tablespoon of sugar, and she'd give me whatever she could when I came back from work. She says, you eat, darling, I'm not hungry." To this day, I keep wondering, was my mother hungry? or did she just want to give it up for me? When I had children of my own, I would have given my life for my children. I think she gave her life for me. Finally, my birthday came around, and I had said for the whole time we were in the ghetto, I would say, while we were eating these terrible patties from potato peels and coffee grounds, I would say if I only had a piece of onion gotten, not even on the black market. But when my birthday came, my mother gave me a hug, she kissed me, and she gave me a present, all wrapped in something, and she handed it to me, and she said, "Here, darling, happy birthday." And it was an onion. It was the best birthday present I ever got. Bless the onion. It was a wonderful gift. But it wasn't long lasted, because she was very, very weak, and that afternoon she passed away. She died on my birthday. After that, I kept working in the factory. You know, I need a drink of water.
And while you're drinking, one of the things that, if it's okay, if I just make an observation, when I hear you talking about your parents, the sacrifices that they made for you, the love that they had for you, even in the most heinous of circumstances, the shielding you, protecting you, and holding you and saying, as long as we're together, we'll be all right. I guess I'm wondering, to what extent do you feel that protective relationship? Because for 5 years you had just the most loving and wonderful childhood before Hitler came into power. To what extent do you feel that relationship helped you to cope with some of the things that you had to deal with, that love that you had?
I always knew that my parents loved me. I never doubted it for one single second, that no matter what happened, my parents were with me, and they would love me, and they would shelter me.
So I think it speaks to the importance of the attachment relationship. And, we talk about how people come to us with broken attachments and that we have a reparative role. And even in my aunt's story, we hear the critical role of that loving attachment bond, even when even in the absence of the physical parent, there's that internal representation of that love, it sounds like. I just want to, you knew somebody kind of famous, didn't you?
In the ghetto.
I think before then. He had funny hair.
Oh, my father was in the banking business way before 33. And he met Albert Einstein, and they became very close friends. And when he visited, I would sit on his lap, and I would play with his hair, and he would would grouch at me, chase me away after a while. And I knew him. He was just a friend of the family a long time ago.
Just a friend of the family. Okay. Albert Einstein. So, so your family had these horrific disruptions. You in the Lodge Ghetto after your mother passed. How did you cope with that loss, and what happened to you in that? How old were you?
I was 13.
So how did you survive that?
I mourned my mother, but I had to keep on working in the factory. And one day, they had the eldest, what they called the eldest of the Jews in the ghetto. He was like a governor. I don't know what you would equal him with. He was supposedly the leader of the ghetto. And not that he had terribly much to say, but he was influential as far as ghetto matters. And he was still ruled by the Nazis, but as far as the ghetto went, he had a lot of power in the ghetto. And he came visiting the factories, and he picked out 4 girls that he adopted. And I was one of the girls. And he also picked out 4 boys from different areas. And just by talking to some of the children that he saw around, and he adopted us at first into an apartment. Later on, he moved us into a bigger home. And he had a woman that took care of us. And we still had to go to work in the factories. But when we came back from work, the woman would cook. We had a little more food than I had previously. He would deal extra food to us children. And there were 8 of us, 4 boys, 4 girls. And we formed very close relationships. We were like brother and sister. Neither one of us had any parents. We were all recently orphaned, and we clung together like glue. And we lived there, and we had a good time there compared to the ghetto life and to many people in the ghetto. We were pretty well taken care of. I had an unfortunate incident. I got appendicitis somehow, and I was dragged to the hospital, and one of the Jewish surgeons there did surgery and removed my appendix. My husband always wondered at me. I had no anesthesia except some dribbles of whiskey. I had have an incision for my appendectomy that's about yay big, and I had never any problems with it. My husband lived in this country, had a huge incision, had all kinds of problems with it. But it went by, except for the bed bugs that I found in the hospital. I remember sitting up at night and picking up bed bugs and throwing them away. And then I went back to the place where I lived with my friends. And we stayed there until the ghetto was given up. As things got worse and the Russians came closer to Poland, to the ghetto area, which was on the border of Poland and I guess closer to Germany than to Russia. I don't quite remember the geography of the countries. But the Russians were coming closer, so the Nazis told the oldest of the ghetto that the ghetto would have to be emptied. They wanted everybody out of the ghetto. So gradually, every day or every week, they would call out names. They would bring them to the station area, and then they would load them onto cattle cars, and they would be driven off. Well, there was a marvelous grapevine, and we knew what was happening. They were going to Auschwitz. But we were still saved until the last people left the ghetto. And then we were called through. We arrived in Auschwitz at the famous place where it says, "Work makes you free." Does it? I think it makes a slave out of you. But anyway, unless you choose your job, then it's free. But slavery is not free work. We got to Auschwitz. We clung to each other. The 4 girls clung together. We lied about our ages. We were always older or younger, whichever the necessity told us to be. Usually a little bit older. And we got through to the camp, through the area where they were sorting out people, going to one side, which was gas chambers, going to the other side, which was to a place where you stayed. The boys were taken to a different side completely. We never saw our boys again. I have a feeling, since they never showed up after the war either, that they were killed. We girls stuck together, and we were in Auschwitz, and it was a miserable, miserable place. We were sleeping in areas that were stables at one time. We were like 5 in a row, sitting one inside your legs, like 5 in a row. Every couple hours they would call us out for roll call, and so many people would be called and would be sent to the gas chambers. We saw the smoke, we smelled the burning flesh, and we were scared. We were so scared. You can't believe how scared we were. This went on for several days, weeks. I have no concept of time. Then finally we were called. The 4 of us clung together, and we thought, well, for better or for worse, here it goes. So we went, and we came to the first place where they shaved our head. Every bit of hair that we had once, long hair like girls. We were just kids. We were 14 at the time. We had long hair, and all of a sudden, the hair was gone. What a terrible feeling. I don't know how somebody can do that to a girl. We felt naked. We felt like all our dignity, all our humanity was gone. We couldn't believe, we couldn't even recognize each other, but we still clung together. Then we were taken into the showers. We were sure these were gas showers, but as it turned out, water came down. Cold water, still water. And we got washed. Then we went into another room and they threw clothes at us. Worn out clothes, clothes that came of bodies of people that they had killed. And we dressed. Then we were put back on cattle cars. We drove again for the longest time, all the way from Auschwitz to Neuengamme, or Hamburg, actually. Hamburg is a big city in Germany. Where we arrived, I saw it a year ago. It's still there. It's a warehouse. It was a warehouse, it is a warehouse, and it's still used. The part where we were put is still there. It's not renovated. It's still there. It still has the same holes. It still has the graffiti that we put there, and it still has the same holes looking at the water. It's still there. They're saving it. It's horrible. It was horrible, and it is horrible. But the warehouse remains, and a business again. From there, we were loaded back on trucks, and we were taken to Neuengamme. Neuengamme is a labor camp, and actually, the four of us were taken to Pappenbüttel, which is a subdivision of Neuengamme. Neuengamme is a huge, famous labor camp. Pappenbüttel was a labor camp with about 2,000 16-year-old. Nobody under 16 and nobody over 20 was at that camp. We were the workforce of the Germans. Our job was to clear the roads in Hamburg that were bombed. What we did was, every morning we got up, we had breakfast, what they called breakfast, which was a canister full of brown water, which they considered coffee, and one slice like that, a big round slice like that of German-style bread. The bread was actually good, but there was just one slice. We took that slice of bread that each of us got and cut it into 4 pieces. We would eat 1 piece for breakfast, 1/4 each. The rest we would very carefully store away. At lunchtime, when we went to work, after we worked so many hours and so hard, schlepping around rocks and stone and dirt and pushing huge wagons of dirt and debris up a hill to a dump, 2 girls at a time. We would sit down, they would give us some water, and we would share another slice of bread, a 1/4 piece of bread each. Then we'd continue working till evening time. When we get back to the camp, we would have what they called soup. It was a canister full of water with some turnips and some potato peels. We ate that and a 1/4 piece of bread. That was our supper after hard labor. Before we went to bed, the evening was spent sitting on the doorstep on the stairway of the entrance to our bunk and watching the bombs fly over the city of Hamburg. We would always sit there and pray, please God, let one of those bombs hit us and put an end to all this. Never happened. It never happened. We just sat there and watched every single night. Before we went to bed, we would go out to the pump and get some water, and we would sit in our beds. We had doubled up our beds. We would sleep together, 2 and 2, so we had a double mattress of straw, and we had double blankets, 2 blankets to cover the 2 of us, and that way we kept warmer and softer. It was not quite as bad as some people had it. And before we went to sleep, we had our water and the last quarter of our bread. Did that save our lives? I think so. We shared, we had something in our stomachs before we went to bed, and we had a steady supply of some food, not much, but some food.
Can I ask you something? Do you think that the relationship that you had with these other girls, did you ever laugh? Did you ever play?
Yes, we did. We played games, we invented games, they sang Polish songs. I was never very musical, so I couldn't sing, but they would sing, I would hum with them. We would sing prayers. Some of the prayers I remembered. And we were kids. We were 14, 15 years old, maybe 16, who knows?
So even in Auschwitz,
Even in Auschwitz.
even with 1 ration of bread and 3 rations of brown water, calling it coffee, soup, and something else, you managed to form bonds, connections, relationships that sustained you and became like family.
Yes. Yes, they certainly did. They were my sisters. They were my camp sisters. And we loved each other, and we shared our bread. It wasn't easy to share bread. Most people stole bread. We didn't steal from each other. We didn't steal from anybody. We shared our bread, and we had 4 pieces of bread each time we could.
Did you have dreams of a future? Did you talk about that?
Yes, we did. We talked about dreams, and we talked about going to America. We talked about going home, if home was still there. We talked about the Nazis being gone. We dreamed of horrible things happening to them. And
I think the word we use for that is resilience. And I think it's the cumulative effect of a lifetime of loving relationships,
yes.
and knowing how to form them, knowing how to use them, knowing how to cope in
And
certain...
they remain till the end of our lives. Like, well, one girl is married in Sweden, and I think she's still alive, but I don't know where. But 2 of the girls passed away, and I was friendly with them all through my life until their death.
Very meaningful, very powerful.
They were lifelong friends.
So, when you, can you talk about when you were, the bombs did not hit Auschwitz. So, can you talk about what it was like when you were liberated?
Well, we remained in the labor camp for quite a while. And Did I tell you the story? We were in the labor camp, and this May a year ago, I went back. I was invited for the 70th reunion of the closing of the labor camp. And I went there with my son, and only then I found out what happened to the labor camp that I was in. There were 2,000 girls in my part and 2,000 girls in the camps right next to us. We were together mostly. 2,000 of us were sent to Bergen-Belsen. We were walked to Bergen-Belsen, and it was a terrible lot. But can you believe that was good? Because the rest of the girls, I just found out a year ago, they were put on 3 German ships that were marked with large swastikas. They were put into the Baltic Sea, and the girls were put into those ships. Then the British came, seeing the swastikas on those ships, bombed those ships. The ships went up into an inferno, and 6,000 girls died in a huge inferno, falling into the Baltic Sea, dead. When I said, you find nothing but bones in that sea. It was horrible. I didn't even know about that. They killed all those girls. We were the lucky ones. We went to Bergen-Belsen. Not many of us in Bergen-Belsen survived, but some of us did. It was the luck of the draw, and I survived. We went to Bergen-Belsen by foot. We were driven by trucks through the outskirts of Hamburg. They were too embarrassed to make us walk through Hamburg. We might have met somebody. They drove us through the streets of Hamburg, many of the streets where we had worked, and took us to Bergen-Belsen. We walked from Hamburg to Bergen-Belsen, which is like a good over 100 miles. And we kept walking and walking. We kept each other up, the 4 of us. When we rested on each other's sides. We huddled together. We rested on each other's sides, and we kept walking. People that tried to run were shot. People that tried to collapse were shot. You either walked or you got shot. There was just no 2 ways about it. So you kept walking. At least we tried to keep walking. If one of us stumbled, the other one would help us up. So we kept going. Finally, we arrived in Bergen-Belsen. We collapsed on the floors of the bunks that they gave us. I don't really know what they were. They were just wooden houses with wooden floors, and we were all piled into one area, and we were just laying there. In the mornings they came through. If you didn't say anything or if you didn't whimper, they would take you out and throw you in the dead piles, jump. We were treated like a piece of meat, and we were just thrown into these big mountains of bodies. Whether you were alive or whether you weren't alive didn't make any difference. I managed to breathe, but I was very, very sick. And I can't even remember when the soldiers, the British soldiers and the American first troops came in. They were the red and green berets where they were wearing. And they came in and they saw the disaster that was happening there. The sick ones were taken out, the ones that could walk were taken to different areas. We were separated. For the first time, we were separated. My friend Genya, who was Russian, started to go back. They helped her to get back to Russia. She wanted to go back to her hometown and see if anybody was left. I met Genya many years later here in the United States. My friend Maja was Polish, and she went to a DP camp, displaced persons camp, and she stayed there for 4 years until she was permitted entry to the United States. I met her here in the United States. She lived in New York, in the Bronx, and we continued our friendship there. I lived at the time with my aunt in Brooklyn, New York. So we did get together several times.
When you were liberated, what happened? What happened? What was the next thing that happened?
I was taken to what they called a field hospital, like a MASH unit or something, and I was treated there. And then a count named Volker Bernadotte, he was a fabulous Swedish man, and he came and he took especially young people, teenagers, to Sweden. He took a lot of other people too, but that was called the program of the white buses. There were altogether 40,000 people that Sweden took in from the camps. America didn't.
Sound familiar?
They took all those people in. I went over by boat, the Castleholm, which was like a hospital ship, and from the ship I was transferred to a hospital. I weighed 45 pounds. I was 18 years old, and I was very, very sick. I had tuberculosis and I had typhus fever. And gradually I recuperated under very good care of the Swedish people. They had doctors, they had nurses, they were wonderful, and they still are wonderful. I met a man only recently at the Jewish Federation, and I told him that I was in Sweden, and I stayed in Sweden for quite a time, like over 2 years, and I had 2 little sisters there because a family took me in, and they had 2 children of their own, and they became my little sisters. But I only knew their first names, Margit and Ursula. And obviously they grew up and they married and had families of their own, and I had no idea. And by some miracle, he managed to find my 2 little sisters. And now I can talk to them on the telephone and enjoy their voices. And unfortunately, they were 10 years younger than me then, and they're only 10 years younger than me now, so they're old ladies. And kind of strange to think of them as old ladies, but they are. And they're wonderful ladies, and I talk to them at least every other week, and we enjoy each other's company by phone. And now I'm dreaming of going to Sweden sometime. Maybe one day I will.
So you seem to have this knack for drawing people to you or finding relationships that become meaningful and life-sustaining and life-affirming. And you, that's something that seems to have followed you for your whole life. What happened when you came to the United States?
I went to my aunt's. My aunt is my mother's half-sister. And she was searching for my mother because my grandmother died in childbirth when she had my mother, and my aunt Paula raised my mother. And she was looking for my mother. She was like her child to her. So she couldn't find her, and she was happy to find me. And she put into motion for me to come to this country. And I came here. I hated to leave Sweden, but I felt that I had to come here and be with the family. That was my family. So I came here on a ship called the Creepsholm, a Swedish ship too, and it was the middle of December and the weather was terrible, and we were running around the boat. I made a friend on the ship, and we were running around, and we were overjoyed coming here, and everybody was standing on the deck saying hello to the Statue of Liberty. And I got a telegram from my cousin, who I had not met since I was about 3 years old, and he sent a telegram to me, and he said, "I'm the one with the pipe in the mouth and the white carnation in the lapel." So I found him, and he took me to my aunt. Arrived there, I started high school, Washington Irving High School in New York City.
Shout out.
I went to Washington Irving High School, and I had a teacher there, and it was very interesting. They didn't have programs like they do for kids nowadays. So he handed me a nice big dictionary, and he said, "Go for it, kid." And he put everything on the board, whatever we had, he put on the board. I used to copy it, and when I got done copying it, I would take it home, and when I got it home, I would sit the whole night long till way into the morning translating the stuff into German. And then I would do my homework in German, and then after the homework was done, I would have to translate it back into English so I could bring it back to school in the morning. Job accomplished.
Yeah.
Have you ever thought, when you do your homework, if you're still doing homework, how long it takes to do a translation and to retranslate it 4 times? Not fun. It takes a long time, but that's how I learned to speak English, or somewhat. After I finished high school, I cheated in high school. I took Regents exams in New York City, and I got 4 credits for German. So that was my foreign language. And I passed the Regent examen and I graduated. I tried to, when I was a kid, I always wanted to be a doctor, but things lower down as you're getting older. And I wanted to be a nurse. So I applied in New York City to be a nurse, but they would not accept me because I was not a U.S. citizen. Here we go again. So I applied at Jewish Hospital in Philadelphia. And I went to Jewish Hospital because that's where they accepted me, and they said, they didn't care I wasn't a citizen yet, but as soon I could take state boards only when I am a citizen. But by that time I would have been here my 5 years, and that way I would be able to take the state boards. So I walked into Jewish Hospital the first day. I was scared to death. I was young, I was scared to death. This was my first experience away from my aunt. And I'm going up this hill, up on the other side comes a lady with a also young girl that's entering nursing. And she looked just as scared as I was. And I hear this lady saying to her, you room with her. You room with her. And turned out this was my sister-in-law, my roommate, my greatest friend, my sister. And it's her mother.
Oh.
And that's how it all started. Baba saying, you room with her. And we did room together. And we had lots of fun. She taught me all the dirty words in English. She taught me all the dirty jokes in English. And all the naughty things that we could get into during school. And we had a lot of laughs and a lot of fun. And she always laughed about my accent. And she always teased me. And I teased her back.
So who's that guy?
She had a brother. A brother. He was quite handsome, I thought. But I never really gave it too much thought. But my aunt was living in New York. We had only short periods of leave from our nursing school, maybe a day or two. And I couldn't go home to New York, so she invited me to her house. Well, that was a disaster. He had a girlfriend, actually. And the girlfriend, I met the girlfriend. She took one look at me and she said, you're going to marry him. Oh, wow. I said, come off it. I don't even know him practically. I'm his sister's roommate. She was right. We started dating and he ditched his girlfriend. And we became good friends. And after I graduated from nursing, I did wait. I graduated from nursing, and after I graduated, we got married. Somewhere there.
What a beautiful bride.
Mm-hmm.
We raised a family. Wasn't always easy. We raised a family. My first child died because I had hormone problems because the Germans managed to mess up my hormone system completely because I was just a youngster in the age bracket of becoming an adult. And they messed me up terribly. And I had hormone deficiencies, and my first child died. He was full-born, but had no kidney, no lung, and he died. It was very sad for me. I thought I would never have any children, but after several miscarriages, I did have 4 lovely children.
One of whom is here tonight.
My youngest daughter. I have Leonard, who's the oldest, and I have David, who's my second son. Then I have 2 girls. I was praying for some girls. I finally got them. And I'm very proud of my 4 children. And I have 4 grandchildren. Also 2 boys and 2 girls. I am very proud of them too. All 8 of them are good college graduates.
Yay.
That was my mission in life. That is out of the ashes came the new life.
Amen. When we've talked about this briefly, I've asked you, it's a strange question to ask, what could one possibly learn from going through something like this, or what the takeaway is. But I've always been struck by what you've said, which is that the most... Let me hear you say.
I want to say in my closing, Yad Vashem, never forget, but respect your fellow man. Don't let it come to a point where you hate so much that it accelerates to violence. Out of hate comes violence, and it's a terrible, terrible thing. Love is much greater than hate. Raise your children with love. Make them remember how terrible it is to hate. Let them respect the next guy, no matter what his color, no matter what his religion. It's just not human to be hateful.
Thank you.
And for me, first I want to say thank you for sharing your story, which is extremely painful, and yet I find it so hopeful, because around every bend there's a loving hand extended. Either you reached out or someone else did, but there was a connection, and those connections sustained you. Where other people lost hope, lost the will to live, lost their faith in humanity, for you, what I've learned is that for as long as I've known you, you have chosen the field you chose is a field of nurturing, giving, a field of health. You're a big sister to people, to young girls, and everything that you do is about giving and loving. And you are my hero. done more than rise up from the ashes. You have created from the ashes something beautiful, and you've honored all of the people whose names were mentioned tonight. And for those moments that you mentioned their name, you breathed life into them again, even just for a moment.